Welcome back to the Coaches Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Trey Belcher. With me, as always, my tag team partner, Corey Smallwood. How's it going, Corey?
Going great this morning. How are you doing, Trey?
I'm doing well. Joining us today on the show is Bobby Capuccio. Bobby is the host of the Self-Help Antidote podcast. He is an industry leader and pioneer in wellness, leadership, and behavior change. He is a best-selling author, co-founder of PTA Global, and the former director of professional development at NASM. Ladies and gentlemen, Bobby Capuccio. Welcome in, Bobby.
You know, for an unscripted podcast, that was a brilliant and eloquent, seemingly scripted introduction.
I don't know what you're talking about. Nope, just right off the cuff.
Right off the dome.
Yep. Just been thinking about it for about 20 seconds and just said, let's go with this.
Very impressive.
Well, the first 20 seconds might be scripted, but other than that, nothing, I promise. So, Bobby, my wife and I have this discussion about our kids. And I've always told my kids that the number one most important trait they can have is toughness. And she says, no, it's kindness. And I said, well, I understand that. But and when I say toughness, I mean resilience. And it's not a zero-sum game, and I understand that. But knowing your work now a little bit, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on A versus B, or how they play hand in hand.
Wow, that's such a complex question. It doesn't seem like it on the surface. And although I hate this phrase in the context of improv, it's true with most things in life. You're both correct. It's yes and. I irritate people because I obsess on semantics. Because a lot of times what I see happening is two people will have a conversation, especially when we're on a social media platform. And it's not a dialogue. It's competing monologues shouting back and forth at each other. It's like, well, what are we actually talking about? Let's stop, rewind a little bit, and add a couple of definitions. Because sometimes we're arguing about something that we don't really know what we're arguing about, or there's a point of commonality we can't identify because we're not identifying the meaning of the word that we're talking about. Resilience is critical. So in my work right now, I do work with a lot of different elements of the public sector. And one of the biggest requests around well-being is we need to culturally, interpersonally, and intrapersonally help people develop higher levels of resilience. And the question is, well, what do you mean by that? So when you talk about resilience being grit and mental toughness, yes, you're absolutely correct. When you're talking about resilience, not being grinding further and taking a step forward, but knowing when to take a step back and breathe. Yes. So when you identify resilience, I look at it like structural resilience. So if we're saying, hey, that bridge or that building is resilient, well, what makes something resilient in engineering? And it's not this unyielding rigidity. I mean, we've seen what happened in, the Bay Area in the 1989 earthquakes. You had a lot of structures that were rigid and they were tough, but they weren't resilient. Resilience is about adaptability. It's about the ability to deal with stress and strain and bend under it and then return back to normal functionality. But unlike materials within engineering, like a building or a bridge, with human beings sometimes, we don't just simply return back to normal functionality. We experience growth as a result of that stress and that strain. So the short answer is yes. It's about stepping back. It's about stepping forward and grinding and mental toughness. Overall, it's about adaptability. I think that's the conversation we're actually having.
I didn't know when I was going to bring this up, but this is such a great transition into me wanting to tell your story. But I wanted, because there are probably a lot of people especially newer fit pros that may not be familiar with who Bobby Capuccio is. And I remember seeing you present for the very first time, and it was at an URSA show. And I think you may have been in the free motion booth. You were definitely with NASM. And I remember walking by and I saw people actually sitting down on the floor, just captivated, absolutely engaged. And I didn't know you at the time. And I mean, people had tears in their eyes. They were emotionally invested in what you were saying. And when it comes to resiliency, I think to understand why you are such a great expert on this and in self-help is knowing your story. Because you're very intellectual. I mean, that's obvious just in hearing you talk, but you lived it. And that was a big thing. So tell us how your childhood growing up, if you want to go there, how fitness played a big part in you maturing and going through getting into adulthood and things like that?
It's interesting because I was having the same conversation yesterday in school. I'm in stand-up comedy school. My wife says it's really not a good investment, and I'm not getting any funnier. But we were talking about this. We were talking about what brought me into fitness. What brought me into the fitness? I don't want to say the fitness industry, but what brought me into the gym wasn't really inspiration as much as it was desperation. So I was born physically deformed. I had severe facial deformities. I know people look at my face now and they're like, whoa, like it was worse than this? Yeah, it actually was, which is very hard to imagine. I had Tourette's growing up, and I was adopted into a family where the person who adopted me, my father died, and my mother remarried a complete psychopath. I actually found out later, I don't know if this is interesting or not, it was for me, that all the males on his side of the family were criminally insane. I'm talking about like Texas Chainsaw Massacre level insane, like these murderously, and it made complete sense. So I grew up in an extremely violent environment, and I was a little kid, probably about the same height I am now. And so for me, being a kid with Tourette's, being physically deformed, I got noticed by everybody, but not in a really good way. So I went to the gym in an attempt to try to disappear, because I didn't want to do team sports anymore. I didn't want to do anything where I was the focal point. I said, maybe I could just put my head down and work on my body. And what had happened was my doctor said, if you can get involved with something that requires intense mental focus and physical exertion, we don't know why. I mean, now we do. But back then, it's like, we don't know why. But it seems to alleviate the symptoms of Tourette's. So I started exercising. And I started getting good results. And what started to happen in my psychological dynamic was unexpected, but transformative, being that for the first time in my life, I had agency. I was used to being in an environment where I had zero control over anything that was happening to me. I was totally at the whims of how quickly I would react to perceiving a circumstance. Like if somebody was in a bad mood, how quickly can I get out of the house before, I get a bone broken or wind up in hospital? So in the gym, I can have a vision in the future of what I wanted to look like or feel like or perform like. And by taking very specific structured steps daily, I could transform not only the results I was seeing, but who I was being indefinitely. That was an amazing concept. And as I started to get really good results as a kid, I started to share it with people because people would ask. So instead of people going, oh my God, what happened to your face? Which was an interesting question. Or why do you do that with your face? Why do you blink so much? Why do you do that with your head? Why do you bark? Interesting question. It was like, how do you get those results? Like, what are you doing? It's like, oh my goodness, wait, hold on. And when I started sharing information, accurate information, I mean, my reference base was Muscle and Fiction magazine, but I didn't know that at the time. I had no way of knowing that. I was like, wow, if I could share what I'm learning and if I could take what works for me and help other people have that work for them, I could get noticed for very positive reasons. And of course, I didn't realize it at the time. There's like, okay, love me, accept me, please. I had that thing going on. And then the more I started to share it, I had a couple of failed career attempts. I always imagined when I was a little kid that when I grew up, I was going to become this person who I always wished would show up for me. That never did, which is not totally true, but there's too much context there. So I tried to join the NYPD and I aced the exam, but they still didn't hire me because they didn't want to give a gun to a guy with Tourette's because they thought, well, this guy's going to shoot somebody. So anyway, I thought, I wonder if I could do this professionally. Like, is there a way to teach this stuff professionally? And I knew someone who was working with a guy by the name of Gary Prince and Dana Carvey, the comedian. They owned a gym in Midtown Manhattan. It was called Prescriptive Fitness. Said, hey, why don't you go there and do an interview and see if maybe they'll hire you? And I went there and I did an interview, and the head trainer, Valerie, brought me around the phone. I did horrible, by the way, like worst interview ever. But I think just out of pity, she was like, okay, well, this guy's trying hard. Maybe we could teach him, do something with him. He's not pretty and he's not too bright, but he seems to like have a lot of work ethic. So I got hired there. And then my second job was at Gold's Gym, and that's when my career started. I met someone who was my first real mentor. I don't know if that's like a long-winded answer, but that's how I got involved in the fitness industry. And then, through a series of events, I found myself hired by NASM and I became a presenter.
No, I don't think it was long-winded at all. I mean, it shows that a lot of times people that do get into fitness and they are genetically gifted, they worked out, they love working out, and it's just easy for them to transition into coaching or helping others. But to have your background brings purpose, and that's transferable when you present, when you speak, when you have people on your podcast or talk or lecture or whatever. I think it has a lot more depth and a lot more meaning to it.
I think one point of commonality, Corey, for people who I've seen work out really well in the fitness industry, like come in and not just make a living, but make a difference. And I'm not saying anything's wrong with just coming in there and trying to make a living, but you're dealing with, at least traditionally, an industry where your success is inseparable from the success of other people. And you're not there to make them successful. And I think one major misconception I've heard from fitness professionals, and it's well-meaning, it comes from good places, I change lives. No, that's very damaging. That's going to hurt more people than it helps. That's going to keep more people down than it lifts people up. You do not change lives unless you are Harry Potter or Professor Charles Xavier. You have no control over someone's autonomy. What you do is you create the environment, the conditions, and the interpersonal dynamics through which someone is encouraged to and empowered to change their own life. And I feel that fitness is very personal. It's not like, well, I got into fitness because, my dad was a trainer and his dad and my great-great-granddad was a trainer. It's no, this did something for me, whether it was in sport or whether I struggled with some health or well-being issue. And then I came out on the other side of it and I want to share that. Fitness by nature has been very emotional, and people can leverage that and let go of the biases of, well, this is what worked for me, so it should work for you. And just say, okay, I want to be this catalyst because I want Mark Smith, the former CEO of 24 Hour Fitness, called this originating intention. I want you to have what I have and experience what I've experienced without conditions. Those people, do more than create a business. They create a cause. Those people have a rippling, enduring impact within the industry.
I knew coming into this thing that there would be no shortage of things to talk about, and I've got a list of like 6 things I've put stars beside. But 2 things that you just said here in this last little bit was about lifting people up. And here in our facility, I say we build people up. Whatever that is that you want to be, that's our job to help exemplify that or exacerbate that or make those things better. And my job is to work myself out of a job to teach people how to do things so they can do it on their own, but to create an environment where they can't imagine not being. And those 2 things, those really hit home to me on that, the real feeling side of it, the emotion side of it. Now, stepping back to the first thing you said, talking about going to stand-up class, you're never funny to your spouse, no matter what. Ever. You're never funny in your own house. It can't be. And no matter how funny you know that you are to your spouse, they have to be the person that grounds you. And I think that's because you have to share all your other vulnerabilities with you. They know how messed up you really are, so they know that you're not funny no matter how much you put on. But all these things, the things we can laugh about, the things that really we work through, those are the things that shape us and the things that drive us. And you telling your story, the things that shaped you. And when you talk about your background and the violence, and then hearing you talk about kindness, I see the bridge and I see how those things have shaped you. And I don't know if there's ever a part where we can step back at our own lives and look at where we were and where we are and understand those things or those moments that really shape us. The things that shaped you growing up, the things that you saw, the things that you experienced. Now, coming through your education and coming through the information that you share with the world, how have the experiences shaped the agency that you have now and that you share with the world?
Okay, so there's a lot of things, obviously, me, like everybody else, our environment, our experiences, but not just our environment, our experiences, our emotional state when we were engaging with those experiences and our interpretation that we developed frames our expectations for the future. right? And how we engage with the world around us. I think for me, a lot of my experiences didn't shape a sense of agency. They diminished it. What they created for me was a state of desperation and a need and a desire and a hope for things to be different. But I didn't know how that was going to show up. Yes, I had the gym. I was like, okay, wow, I know it is possible, but I don't know how this connects to anything else in my life. What happened for me, and this is why I wanted to be in the fitness industry in the long term, because I met someone. He was the owner of the gym, Gold's Gym. I said, that's where my journey started. And when I first got the job at the gym, I felt like, oh man, I am not going to be as smart as these other trainers. And I had taken one exam, the ACE exam, Council on Exercise, and I passed. And I didn't even know how I passed. I was like, wow, that's hard. But from the information I learned, I had arrived at the conclusion that I'm just not going to be good at this because I'm kind of stupid. And the reason why I thought I was stupid is because everybody told me, you're stupid. Like teachers would just hold their head and shake their head back and forth. You know, other kids would be like, wow, why are you so stupid? Which I always thought was an odd question. Because if I'm really that stupid, how do I have the resources to even begin to answer that question? Like, wow, I didn't know what a rhetorical question was at the point, but it sounded like it. I came to the decision. One thing I could always do is work very, very hard. I was working illegally, violating tons of labor laws from the time I was 10 years old. And, you know, it was my first job was mixing fertilizer, which talk about like literally a job. So I thought, I'll just work super hard and earn my value that way. But again, not too bright. So one day I was kind of like hosing down the equipment with WD-40, like spraying the guide rods so the equipment and the weight stacks would move smoothly. But rather than intelligently spraying the WD-40 on a rag and then wiping all the components, I was just spraying it. And what I didn't realize is I was spraying it through the guide rods into the face of someone using the piece of equipment like right next to me. Now, this person, despite the fact that they had never been so well lubricated in their life, did not have a sense of humor about this, went upstairs to the owner, who was a terrifying guy. He looked like a cross between Bugsy Siegel, Al Capone, and Burt Reynolds, if you could just get that in your head. And he's like, okay, this guy just hosed me down, just sprayed me in my face. It's like, who is this guy? He's looking at me running, literally running full speed, as if I was being timed, and cleaning as much equipment as I could. He's like, get this guy up in my office. And he wasn't angry. He was actually very curious. And as we started talking, he thought that I had something to offer. And it sounded absurd. But the more I talked to him, the more he started to point out with specificity, like, I'm saying this because you made this observation. And he gave me a reputation to live up to. And he held a space for me that is one of the preeminent suppositions in coaching, which is my belief is greater than your doubt. And eventually, I wanted to live up to that reputation. I wanted to become the person he saw me as. So I started taking steps. And as I started taking steps, I started building a body of evidence that, wait a minute, I am capable of doing something. Maybe I don't learn the way other people learn, but it doesn't mean I'm not capable of learning. And it just so happened to be that the way I learn is to teach, which was quite serendipitous. And as I started to find myself in a diversity of experiences, because in his company, there were two directions. There was up and there was out. And the only way you can move up is if you learned every aspect of the business. You had to learn sales because sales was the lifeblood of the business, as it is with any business. You had to learn the service end. And I started to develop a body of evidence suggesting efficacy. And I think it's those micro wins. Agency is built on what Albert Bandura in social cognitive theory would call mastery experiences. And mastery is micro wins that you can study, reflect upon, dissect, and grow as a result from. So you can engage in bigger, more complex types of problems that you can solve. So that's what developed my agency, was having someone who really believed in me and challenging me and giving me the environment to test those assumptions until I could discover that for myself. And I no longer needed to borrow his belief because I had generated belief for myself.
Now, you've had some legends that you have worked with in your career, Bobby, and you talked about your first mentor and things, but you've worked with, you said Mark Smith, but Dr. Michael Clark and Thomas Plummer, and I mean, the list goes on and on. Who would you say were some of the most influential? I know it's like you've worked with so many that, and what did they bring to the table? What did they teach you throughout your career?
Okay, can I just give a little bit of context for this?
Of course.
Because this is an important question, but I think the question is more important than it seems on the surface. So there's a great film. I love films. I married a filmmaker called Adaptation, starring Nicolas Cage. Co-starring, well, Nicolas Cage. He plays twins, Charlie and Donald Kaufman. And there's this one scene where the twins are talking to each other. I think it's Charlie was in love with this girl, Sarah. And he's like, oh, do you remember that one day, Donald, his brother's like, you were outside and you were talking to her by the library. And he remembers it instantly. He says, oh my God, that was the best day of my life. He said, yeah, I never told you this. I was in the library and I was watching from the window and she walked away from you. And when she went over to her friends, she was making fun of you. She was cruel and it was brutal and it hurt me because we're twins. So it felt like she was making fun of me. And Charlie goes, yeah, oh, I knew that. I overheard her. He's like, but you were so in love with her even after that. How could you be in love with someone who was so cruel to you? And he said, well, my love for Sarah was the greatest thing in my life at that point. And that was mine. And nobody had the right to take that from me, including Sarah. He's like, and then he says something that I think is one of the most beautiful lines in cinema. He said, you are what you love, not what loves you. And like, sit with that for a second. So think about the people you admire and why you admire them. And you are what you admire. The people you admire and your mentors, the people that you want to be like and be around is so reflective, not just of the gifts and the attributes that they possess, but the ones that you possess or you greatly desire to possess. And in 95% of the situations, the only difference between you and them is a decision and time. And I just want to preface that. So I think, Tom Purvis was one of the first people who really inspired me, even before I met him, because what he did is he taught me about structuring your thinking through process. What's the process you go through to organize what you're learning and direct it so you can apply it, evaluate it, and modify it continually? And to me, that's innovation. So you go back a decade, which, is a long time ago, especially relative to, our current world we're living with the rate of evolution and advancement. But it's not that long ago. IBM, asked nearly 2,000 executives through multiple industries, multiple companies, what is the number one critical skill set for success in the 21st century? And almost unanimously came back innovation. So that was critical. And then Neil Spruce became someone else because for me, Neil not only had a lot of information, but this was the first time that I saw someone in fitness be able to get up in a room of people and cultivate a narrative to where you can see a shared ideology with most of the room starting to emerge, and it formulated culture. So Neil was the first person to not only teach me, but demonstrate culture. When I say culture, it's when a group of people have a shared vested interest. And out of that vested interest comes a set of beliefs and values and patterns that create predictable behaviors that facilitate outcomes. And Neil really showed me that. Tom Plummer was another one because Tom is a force of nature in front of a room. There was rumors in the industry that Tom was part of the undead, like he had sold his soul years ago, because he would be, and not like a young 20-something-year-old Tom. He would be out at 2:00 in the morning with all the usual suspects. He'd be up at 5, and by 7:00 in the morning, he'd be putting out more energy between 7 and 8 in the morning than most people put out in the course of a week. And I'm talking about high energy people. It's like, okay, this guy's not human. Something's wrong here. So, but he blended entertainment with practically applied information. I would say that Richard Boyd and his ability to identify who the right people are at the right time and the right combination to accomplish a task or a project, one of the best networkers I've ever seen in my life. Ian O'Dwyer, just for his ability not only to master and apply very complex information, but Ian understands it's not what you're doing, it's who you're being. Every time Ian walks into a room, he elevates the energy in the room and creates a level of psychological safety where people can engage in vulnerable conversations in a way that uncovers things that no other facilitator can uncover. And as a result of that, leverages high performance. Like, you will grow. And that list goes on and on and on. I just want to honorable mention to the late, great Dennis Waitley. He's not a fitness person. He was a fighter pilot turned, self-help speaker. He was the first person who I ever listened to who showed me that your ideas and what you say has a profound impact in how they shape other people. And it was the link between teaching and art. And art is the ability of you to see yourself in me and me see myself in you and grow collectively. So that's the short list. I'm sure there's a lot of people I am leaving out, but
Great list.
Now, once you were taught or given that belief that you could grow in this business and in the industry, how then did you develop through the people that influenced you your dynamism with sharing your ideas?
I think, wow, okay. I think I was just I was so enthusiastic and inspired that, one, I was capable of doing anything at all. Two, that I was capable of developing a body of knowledge. And three, that other people found value in their lives and they could share it with other people. So I think that bled out of me just quite naturally. Another person who I did not mention that I really, really should have, because he's been a valuable part of my life, not just professionally, but personally. And when we talk about kindness, he is the epitome of, there is a difference between being nice and being kind, and that is David Barton. David Barton he has built multiple incredible brands. And when I first went to work for David Barton, we had an all-day interview, and he had hired me. I think in 1998. I'm kind of dating myself, and I got out of my element. Because working at Gold's Gym, this is just prior to my NASM days. Working at Gold's Gym, I was working in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, Staten Island, North Jersey. It's a very different environment, right? It's like The Sopranos goes to the gym. And then I found myself on the Upper East Side on Madison Avenue with a very different clientele. And I had said, okay, well, David, what is one or two things that if I do them exceedingly well here, it will have the highest value to our membership base, our clients, the organization, and of course, my career trajectory. And he just leaned back and he gave me this face. I was like, oh, that was a stupid question. I'm expected to know that. And I said, okay, 3 things. It's like, okay, all right, what are they? It's like, I want you to be as good at spotting talent and hiring great trainers like a sommelier is in assessing wine. And I thought, okay, that's pretty eloquent, bit dramatic. I got that. And then he's like, I want you to train them on how to perform and how to deliver, not just outcomes, experiences. And I said, okay, 3rd thing. He said, train them again. So David's philosophy was the opposite of Gold's Gym. At Gold's Gym, it's like, everything's your responsibility. All right? Front desk person doesn't show up. Guess what? You're the front desk person. Maintenance doesn't show up. We'll figure it out, right? And there's a lot of truth to that. With David, it was like, no. Think about 10 different things that you can do on a daily basis here. Now, identify the 2 or 3 things that has the greatest immediate and enduring impact on the business, and double down and focus single-mindedly on those things. And if they don't align with your strengths and your willingness to grow, you're in the wrong spot. If they do, focus on that, because everything else will hire other people to do, because you've got to grow the business every day. Focus on your strengths. Everything else is noise. And for him, like, how do I scale training trainers? Speaking. And the more I started to see that created a result in the room with the trainers on the fitness floor in terms of building a client base, retaining a client base, hitting budget every month, the more inspired I started to become. And by the time I showed up at NASM, there was like, people talk about success all the time. And I think the whole thing about success is deeply flawed because there are so many biases and connotations. The most successful person I have ever met in my life was my ex-girlfriend's mother, who was a school teacher. And she did not make a lot of money. She did not have a big house, did not drive a fancy car. But every morning when she woke up, the exact thing she wanted to do that day was the exact thing she reflected on having done before she went to bed. And it was that alignment. And that's how I felt. Like no matter how tired I was, no matter how many planes were delayed, when I woke up in the morning in a strange city at 4:35 a.m., the thing that I was going to do is the thing I most wanted to do in the world. So it wasn't a matter of inspiring myself to go to work. It was a matter of having the openness to allow what was within me to flow through me whenever I got the opportunity to serve a room of people. That was the key.
A lot of fitness professionals that get in and they want to be on the stage. They want to go and speak and present. And one of the things that I think that makes you so captivating isn't just the mastery of the knowledge, which you obviously do, study a lot and really learn your craft, but it's the ability to tell stories and to connect through. You can have somebody that has all the knowledge in the world, but if they can't convey it, then it's not well received. So was that something that was innate in you? Was that something that you worked on, getting up there and telling stories? Or because that's really what is so captivating in hearing you present?
Oh, no. See, Mitchell, my first mentor at Gold's Gym, he challenged me to do things that I would have, the narratives that I put together, just the creative energy and just trying to create an acceptable excuse to not do the things he wanted me to do. Like when he put me in sales, these stories I would tell myself and him, he forced me into positions. All I wanted is to prove to other people that, okay, Mitchell didn't make a mistake. So training was the first thing I was ever really good at. I didn't want to become a manager. I didn't want to do sales. But he was like, yeah, listen, you don't really have an option. I mean, you do. You can go work somewhere else and they'll hire you as a trainer, but you can no longer work here. And when he put me against my will in management, he believed in the power of oration because he believed that it wasn't enough to build people one-on-one. People had to come together so they're experiencing the same things, having the same insights and the same dialogues collectively. And I think it was 2 weeks after I got promoted to the lowest level of management in the company, head trainer, right? And he gets up in front of an all staff meeting. There's three gyms present in the in the group X room. It's about 150 people. And he says, okay, I'm going to bring Bobby up now. And he's going to tell you in his new position how he's going to make this organization a cooler, more dynamic, profitable place. I had no idea how I was going to do any of those things. I didn't understand what those things meant. And he brought me up in front of the room. Just remember the T. Michael workout pants we used to have back in the 90s? And remember how they were really tapered at the ankles, but then they ballooned out to the pockets? Well, I had a bunch of change in my pockets from buying food during my break. And all you could hear in the room was change rattling because my knees were shaking so hard. I felt like I was going to throw up. And I plagiarized, just literally regurgitated, not willingly. It's just what came out. Track 4, Positive Self-Direction of Dr. Dennis Waitley's Psychology of Winning. And the room got up and applauded. And that was my first experience. And he's like, we're going to put you up in front of every audience. And I felt horrible. It was the last thing I wanted to do. I think there's an element of desire that has to be there. But I would recommend to anybody who wants to be a presenter, read Charles Bukowski's essay on Don't Do It. And what he's talking about is if you want to be a writer, and he's going through all the reasons why people want to be a writer. And the message is don't do it. Don't do it. You're going to regret it. It's not going to be what you think. You are making a huge mistake. If you are suited to do anything else, I mean, absolutely anything else at all, try that. He said the only time you should ever, and I'm paraphrasing, be a writer is when it's constantly in your ear. And eventually that whisper becomes a scream. And writing is so much a part of who you are and what you have to do that you cannot not do it. And if you cannot be anything else because your DNA makes you nothing but a writer, then you have to go write. But for any other reason, don't do it. And I think it's hard because in today's day and age, everybody has a platform and that platform has enormous potential. But why are you doing what you're doing? Is there any other way? Because it's got to be a means to an end to some degree. The best advice I ever got from a very successful theater performer is the difference between average people who are super talented and they work very, very hard and those who become legends is they have an equal balance of a massive ego and a beautiful level of humility in the same persona, same delivery in the same exact moment. So it's not just a matter of, God, I want to be on stage. What is the need that only you could fill by assuming that position? Because the more you show up on stage, like, wow, here I am, the harder it's going to be, the more you're going to suck, the more you're going to blend in with a sea of sameness. When you rock up on that stage and your perspective, even by default, not design, is, wow, oh my God, there you are. That is a very, very different dynamic. And I've been in both headspaces for different reasons. And I could tell you where there you are, you become an antenna. Whatever comes out of you is what flows through you. Where in the first scenario, you're going to have to force something out that seems contrived and it seems counterfeit. And it seems like something that can be said by anybody else. It's going to make, for most people, not everybody, all the difference.
When you talk about the dichotomy of ego and humility, going by your experiences, the things you talked about earlier on when you were talking about growing up and how people viewed you and how people treated you, it gives you this sense of vulnerability. And especially when you are up on the stage, you are totally vulnerable because everybody's watching you, good, bad, or indifferent. And do you think those experiences for you helped shape and maybe even create more dynamism because now you get a chance to take all those experiences plus all the knowledge that you have and all the things that you've learned, and you get to just be the center of attention, but also be the one that shares, despite all the kids asking you, why are you so stupid? Now you're the expert. Now you're the one that gets to share. Do you think that fans that flame even greater?
For me, no. For me, the answer to that is no. And I think there's an element of ego where to get up in front of a room of people with the intention of contributing and capturing mind share and facilitating an openness on an emotional, not just psychological level, that takes a bit of audacity, to get out there and go, well, yeah, I can make a difference. Yes, I have all these experiences and value to share, and most people do. But the fact that I can share it and I'm going to make a difference in this room in someone's life, they're going to walk out of here with something they didn't come in here with and be different in a positive way as a result. That takes a bit of ego. But for me, that would always shut me down. What really made the difference is being able to get into a room and focus on the audience and on the mission to the point where I disappear. At NASM, there was what I loved about my experience at NASM is coming from Brooklyn. We hang on each other. Like, if I really like you, I am going to say unmerciful things to you, to where if we're not getting on, because I will be really polite. It's like living in London was so similar. It was almost indistinguishable coming from New York. And when I say New York, like the boroughs, Brooklyn, Manhattan's a little bit of a different animal. So when I got to NASM, oh man, like Rob Rettman and Rodney Korn, both which had a huge positive impact on me, they were just brutal with me. And they used to make fun of me every morning because they knew something that nobody else knew. I used to have this signature introduction at NASM, and everybody in the room thought it was because of dramatic effect. And, some of these classes back in that day were quite large, and you were in this huge packed ballroom. You could have a couple of hundred people in the room. And it was this massive event, and they would introduce me for the first time, and nobody would be on stage. And you would hear this disembodied voice going into the introduction. And all of a sudden, I would dramatically come walking through the aisles with my headset on or my lapel mic. It's like, oh, that's the presenter. And then I'd get up on the stage, very dramatic. And people thought, oh, okay, wow, he's doing this to interrupt preoccupation. No, they knew the truth, because when I heard my introduction, okay, so in the next section, I would be so nervous that I'd have to go to the loo. I'd have to have a wee. There's no way I could get up on stage and focus. Oh, God. All right. So like when you're introducing Bobby, like take a little bit of extra time because he's going to be in the toilet. And everybody knew that was the real reason. So I was literally just coming into the back of the room as they finished. So I had to start my introduction from there. That's how the first couple of hundred times I ever spoke, it made me want to vomit. And what I did, I never scripted anything because I do not, I mean, know your content cold, but I don't believe in scripting presentations. That's a different podcast episode. But I would perfectly script the intro, whether that was a story, because I knew if I could just engage within 5 minutes, it would shift from what I'm feeling to what I'm there to give. And I would, by the end of that intro, I wouldn't be in that room anymore. Almost like the DeLorean hitting 88 miles an hour, bam, I'm gone. And once you disappear is when you're connected to that audience. When it is not about you, you have zero self-awareness. I mean, that's not totally true, but you get what I'm saying. You're not in your head. The vast majority of your focus is who's in front of you, not what you're experiencing within you. I think that is a critical key, not just in public speaking, but just in delivering any skill.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say you scripted the first couple minutes and then it was go from there. And that's how the Coaches Unscripted podcast is.
It works. It's what I'm struggling with now in comedy, actually. In school, every time I get on stage, my coach, my teacher, was a really nice guy. I've had some improv coaches, people in the performing arts that were brutal with me. They didn't take any of my and he's just like, you've got to get out of your head. Oh my goodness, you really have to stop overthinking it. And then when I get on stage in front of an audience, it's like he'll watch me struggle the entire season of class and then just light it up. Because once I get on stage, it's not, oh, it's this joke landing. Okay, here's the premise. Here's the setup, punchline, tag. I'm not thinking any of that. I'm going, oh my God, like all these people showed up. I know that people's lives lately are feeling a little bit unpredictable. Like the level of anxiety in society is, it's like these people showed up for me. I'm going to show up for them. And then once that happens, it's like the presenter in me comes out and the self-obsessed, selfish little comedian on stage that wants his classmates to think he's funny. Like that guy's gone. I do want my classmates to feel like I'm funny. I love my classmates. I seek their approval.
Just validate me.
Just not to practice, just to get approval from my classmates every week.
I think that speaks to, so many of the elements that we've talked about is just that presence. You get out of your head and you can just be, and you can feel, and your awareness raises. You become one with the audience. You feel what they feel, and you can react and respond based on those things, and you can have a little bit of resilience. You can bend with them, but then you come back and you can share those things that you feel they want to hear and need to hear.
Yeah, you just articulated perfectly why I am not a fan of, because I know there's a lot of schools of thought around scripting your presentation. And a lot of times people who give the most advice on public speaking are those who have done it the least. And what they're doing is projecting their insecurities. Like, I wouldn't know what to say. I would need a PowerPoint with 27 bullets because people love that shit. And that's what I'd have to lean on. Where are you? You're not even on that. Like, where are you with your audience? You're in your head. You're not even there with them. Don't be in front of them. Be with them.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to sum it up and to wrap it up. And Bobby, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for being here with us. And
thanks for having me.
Anytime you want to come back and talk about anything and everything, we're here for it. And
thanks, because I got a lot on my mind. Next Monday? Excellent.
That's fine. We'll see you then.
Okay.
Some things I'm struggling with. I just want to get off my chest. Well, really appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. And we can even do improv class.
That would be fun.
Well, we thank you for joining us on the Coaches Unscripted podcast. We hope today's stories have inspired and empowered you. Follow us on Instagram at Coaches Unscripted Podcast to continue the conversation and stay updated on future episodes. Follow Bobby on Instagram at The Self-Help Antidote and catch his podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or at his website, theselfhelpantidote.com. Bobby, we thank you so much for joining us. For Bobby Capuccio, Corey Smallwood, I'm Trey Belcher. Keep coaching from the heart and building strong communities.